Hi everyone, very good morning. So my name is Arun and I'll be the trainer for this course for CCNP Security S Core module, which we'll be talking about. So let me quickly share my screen so we can cover a couple of things with respect to the actual certification. Okay,
This is the course or a demo class?
this is a demo class.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll be covering the basics, what are the modules that we'll talk about and everything, and then I'll take any questions if anyone has with respect to the course. Okay. All right. Hope everyone can see my screen, can see the slide deck.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right. So this is the implementing and operating Cisco security core technologies course, okay, which is one of the requirements for CCNP security as well. So it's one of the core exams. Now, the Cisco certifications recently went through a change. When I say recently, it's been a couple of years already. So previously, you had to take multiple exams to achieve your CCNP security, and then you also used to have a CCI written exam before you could appear for the CCI lab. So Cisco kind of revamped it. They removed the requirements of having to do 3, 4, 5 exams to achieve CCNP, and then they also removed the requirement to do a CCI written. Okay, so now the very first exam that you can take without even taking your CCNA is a core exam. Okay, and every single technology has its own core exam. So, for example, what we are going to talk about is the CCNP Security track, which has its own core exam, which is the S score, and it basically covers all of the core security technologies. Similarly, you will have something for enterprise, which we call as EN core, which covers everything with respect to implementing your enterprise technologies. Okay, so core technologies, that's what we will be concentrating on. And then this core exam also now acts as a prerequisite for the CCI lab. So you don't really need to do any other exam. If you don't want to do CCNP, you don't want to do CCNA, you can do CCNP core exam, and then you basically get eligible to appear for the CCI lab. Okay. Now, the second part of why we are here is for the CCNP security. Now, if you want to do CCNP, in addition to the core exam, you would also need to appear and pass for one of the concentration exams. Okay, and concentration exams, you can think of them as specialist exams. Okay, so again, within CCNP security, you have a good number of concentration exams. Okay, each one concentrates on a very specific technology or a very specific product, right? So for example, the SNCF exam here, this only concentrates and dives very deep into next generation firewall. The 715 does the same thing for ICE. Okay, these next two, 20 and 25, they talk about the ESA and WSA, content security. 730 is for your VPN. 735 is your S auto, basically automation with respect to security technologies. And then the last one, which I've added it in green color here, this is a newer exam that Cisco came out some months ago. Okay, it's a very cool exam. Okay, with respect to, this is talking about user and endpoint protection. Okay, so it covers a lot of things, right? From SD-WAN to AWS, GCP, Azure security, to your endpoint security, to Umbrella and everything. Okay, tetration and all of those things. Okay, but our focus for this course is going to be the 350701 S score. Okay, in which we are basically going to cover everything that you see within the concentration exam, but at not that deep level. Okay, that's what the S score is. Okay, it runs very wide. Okay, there's a breadth of technology and knowledge that you need to gain, but it does not go into a very deep on all of these technologies. Okay, so if you want to learn them in very in depth, right? You would need to study and take the courses, take the content for these concentration exams. Okay. So one core exam, one concentration exam, that's what is now a CCNP. Okay, so very easy. Okay, um, not really from the perspective of the technologies, but from it being very straightforward, and then also it costs a bit less now for someone to achieve a CCNP. And then you separately don't have to spend some more money on the CCI written before you appear for the lab. Okay, so just a core exam acts as a prerequisite for both your CCNP as well as CCIE now. Okay, that's why it is covering breadth of technologies. Okay, breadth of different products. So the domains that are part of the security core technologies are, first is the security concepts. This is basically very high level view of what cybersecurity is, what information security is, what are different attacks that can happen. Okay, I'll discuss things like NIST framework, ISO framework, where they are used. Okay, what are threats? What are vulnerabilities? What are different types of attacks? What are different types of viruses, malware, etc. So the first domain is the only one which is, you could think of it as being very theoretical. Okay, so there is nothing to implement, nothing to configure in that domain. Okay, the rest of them, yes, they are the ones which, for example, network security, this talks about ASA and next generation firewall. Okay, you have securing the cloud. This is where we talk about things like Umbrella or maybe CI/CD pipeline. Okay, content security is where we'll discuss WSA, ESA. Okay, web proxies, SMTP server. How do you do mail policies? Okay, how do you protect your SMTP servers? Then you have endpoint protection and detection. This is the EDR part. Okay, where you are running some sort of an agent on your user workstations. Okay, with respect to Cisco, this used to be called as AMP, Advanced Malware Protection, for endpoints. Okay, now it's basically called as Secure Endpoint. And then lastly, the last part is your secure network access, visibility, and enforcement. This is where we'll discuss things like AAA, Radius, 802.1x, ICE, things like guest access. Okay, when I say visibility, it would mean things like Stealth Watch or NetFlow. Okay, so you can see that we are covering, from Cisco's perspective, almost everything that Cisco has to offer with respect to security technologies. There are some other things which are not mentioned in the slide here. Okay, so for example, let's say something like multi-factor authentication. Okay, Cisco has a product called as Cisco Duo, which does multi-factor authentication. Okay, so a lot of these things we are going to cover. Okay, again, it is not going to dive very deep into it. Okay, that's not the purpose of S-Core. Okay, we have separate classes for that. So for example, if you're mostly interested in getting very deep dive knowledge into ICE, then we run separate modules for the ICE as well, which talks only about ICE in depth. Okay, the S-Core should serve as a very good foundation for you to progress within the Cisco security world and security in general. Okay, so always remember, whatever you learn here with respect to security, you can apply it to other vendors as well. Okay, so for example, things like VPN. Okay, IPsec VPN, site-to-site remote access, it remains the same. The technologies are industry-wide. Okay, so if you learn something from Cisco's perspective, you can take that knowledge and you can apply it to something like Palo Alto or to something like maybe Fortinet. All right. So that's what the purpose is going to be for the S-Core, to get you up and running. Okay, and this is very good if you have kind of no knowledge with respect to, let's say, Cisco security. Okay, you're just starting, or maybe if you have worked with some of these products, for example, maybe ASA, or maybe Firepower, or maybe ICE. Okay, and you want to really, maybe are trying to prepare for a certification. Okay, or just in general, you may be trying to work through towards maybe preparing for an interview or a change of career, maybe moving from another domain to security. All right, this is going to be very helpful for that. All right. Any questions, anyone, before I move to a different slide where I want to show you all the domains and topics that we will talk about?
Arun, any prerequisites before starting this course? As I do not have any knowledge in security. Means the basic knowledge I have, but not much.
As long as you understand CCNA level concepts, right? You understand how packet flows, what a layer 2 switch is, what a layer 3 router is, what's the difference between them, okay? When I say this is doing something like ARP, okay, so you understand what those things are. In my opinion, that's the only thing that you should worry about, okay? From a security standpoint, I'll be going right from the basics of everything. Okay, so from a security standpoint, you don't really need to worry. But yes, you need to understand what, how, let me just say how, what life of a packet is within a network. Okay, when I say I'm configuring a default gateway, right, you should know what a default gateway is, why it's being configured. Okay, so those are the things that I won't be talking about because I kind of assume that, you still have, or you would have some CCNA level knowledge, you have some routing and switching knowledge, right? You don't need to be in depth. Okay, we are not going to be dealing with things like maybe multicast or BGP or maybe MPBGP or EVPN and those sort of things. We're not going to deal with those. Okay, but I still would want people to have that basic CCNA level knowledge. Okay, and then we're going to build security on top of it. No problem. All right. Okay. So having said that, let me bring up the actual blueprint for the S-Core. Okay, this is for the version 1.1. And this is basically downloadable from Cisco. So if you go to Cisco Learning Network, this is available there to be downloaded as part of a PDF. Okay. The only purpose here was to show you the wide nature of S-Core and what all we will be covering within the S-Core here. Okay. So as you're going to see, the security concepts, and anytime you go through Cisco's blueprints, some of the keywords are very important and they can help you understand what and how much you need to prepare that particular section. Okay, so for example, if I look at security concepts, I told you that this is going to be mostly theoretical. Okay, there's nothing to configure in this section. Okay, and if you're going to see, this is about 25% of the exam. Okay, so always when you look at these topics within the Cisco blueprint, always look at these, typically these initial keywords. Okay, so none of these keywords here have written something like an implement or a configure. Okay, all they want you to understand is to be able to explain what common threats are. Okay, these are the different types of malwares that you need to have understanding about what they are. All right. From a cloud perspective, what would be insecure APIs? What are DOSes? What are distributed DOSes? Okay. Some web-based vulnerabilities. Okay. You should know what maybe OWASP is, what they do, why that is there. Okay. Then things like what is hashing, encryption. Okay. What is a CIA? All right. So all of this is basically just to describe and a compare. So you should basically know them by definition what they are. So you could be asked questions based off of that, right? Moving from there, all of these other sections, in all of these other sections, you would see things like configure and verify, implement. Okay, so this is where you should know how the configuration pieces work. Okay, so if Cisco is saying you should be able to configure and verify network segmentation using VLANs or maybe port security. Okay, so you should know what commands go into configuring a switch-based port security and what you can do to verify that configuration, maybe through a debug or maybe through a show command. Okay, so these sections here with the configure and the implement, you should basically know, yes, what that feature is, what it's trying to do at a theoretical level, and you also should be able to know how to configure it. Okay, that's basically how you interpret the blueprint. It gets much easier for you to understand how much time you need to put into certain certain sections. Okay. So this network security, this basically will talk about things like your IPS and your firewall. Okay, we're going to look at different deployment technologies and different solutions for network security. Okay, this also talks about NetFlow. All right, and then layer 2 and layer 3 protection. Basically, I call this infrastructure security. Okay, where we implement security through our switches and routers itself. Okay, we harden those devices both from the control plane, data plane, and management plane perspective. Right. This section here, this again talks about some of the advanced features for next generation firewall, things like application visibility and control, URL filtering, this is malware protection, and IPS policies, right? How would you manage firewalls, right? So these are your management options here. So you should know those and be able to configure them, right? AAA, from the perspective of implementing TACACS and Radius, this is where we'll discuss ICE. And some of the general NMS-based solutions within the network, how do you implement an NTP or secure syslog? Okay, what is RESTconf or netconf? Be able to configure and verify site-to-site and remote access VPN. And this is going to be from the perspective of both from routers and firewalls as well. Okay, and using Cisco's AnyConnect platform or AnyConnect solution to establish remote access VPN. So similarly, we'll have securing the cloud. So these two sections are kind of high weightage. If you're going to see 25% for this and 20% for the network security. Securing the cloud is a bit less, just 15%. Okay, and there is just a single implement and a configure here. Okay, and this here, configure cloud logging and monitoring technologies. This is where we talk about StealthWatch Cloud. Okay, so this year we saw StealthWatch here as well, NetFlow. So this is NetFlow or StealthWatch Enterprise, which is an on-prem solution. There is a StealthWatch Cloud as well, which can help you log and monitor your cloud-based activities, right? Maybe you have deployments in AWS or Azure or GCP that can be integrated and implemented there. Rest, a lot of these are basically just your basic concepts, right? What is SaaS? What is PaaS? What is IaaS? What's the difference between them? Right? When I say a public versus a hybrid cloud deployment, what is that? All right. How do you do security assessment in the cloud for vulnerabilities? Okay. How do you patch in the cloud? Okay. Not too much from a cloud perspective. Again, keep in mind the whole purpose of S-Core is to build that foundation for you, okay, and get you up and running. Next, 15% for the content security as well. Okay, this is where we will talk about ESA, WSA. Okay, how do you implement proxy solution? How do you implement email security? And then we'll also talk about a very cool Cisco product, which is called a Cisco Umbrella. Okay, where we are doing everything within the cloud, within Cisco Cloud. If anyone has experience with or has maybe talked about or discussed Zscaler, for example, okay, Umbrella is a direct competitor to Zscaler. Specifically, their ZIA solution, Zscaler Internet Access. Okay, so Umbrella does the same thing what the ZIA does. So like I said, once you learn one product or a vendor, it is very easy for you to correlate and put that knowledge to other vendors as well. Okay, so it does not really keep you restricted to a single vendor. Just like with something like routing protocols, right? You learn OSPF, you can implement OSPF everywhere. Okay, whether I give you an HP router, I give you Juniper, or maybe I give you a firewall, right? Once you understand how OSPF works and how it needs to function, you are able to implement it. Same thing we have here. Yes, sure, there are some proprietary things that every vendor does in itself, but that is just within their own environment. Okay. So content security here, right? And if you're going to see that there's a lot of implementations here, right? Implement traffic redirection for web proxy, okay? Then configure web and security deployment, configure email security features, configure Cisco Umbrella SIG, secure internet gateway, Okay, this is where we will talk about how Umbrella integrates with SD-WAN if you want to do SASE. Okay, some web security implementations features that you can do on Cisco Umbrella, right? So a lot of cool stuff here, a lot of good stuff in here that Cisco wants you to know. This is here endpoint protection and detection. This is EDR. Okay, it is very similar to you running an antivirus solution on your desktop. Okay, but a little bit more advanced. Okay, so this is where we talk about Cisco Secure Endpoint. Okay, previously it used to be called as AMP or Advanced Malware Protection. So this guy here, this used to be called as AMP. Okay, Advanced Malware Protection. And we used to call it for endpoint because it is running on the endpoint itself. So anytime the user is executing any file, doing a copy, create anything, etc., this endpoint runs on that machine and reports and tries to protect that endpoint. Okay, so these are all of these features here. Okay, outbreak control, quarantines, endpoint-based security, right? And then I also said that there is MFA as well, multi-factor authentication. Cisco has a solution called as Duo for it, Cisco Duo, yeah, which does multi-factor, which does a lot of different things. Multi-factor authentication, you can do SAML. It acts as an IDP, an identity provider. Okay, so it can integrate with something like your firewall. Okay, so if someone is trying to log into your firewall, you can send the request to Duo. Duo will send that request to that user, a push notification. If it gets approved, it will allow that login. Okay, it's a very high level view of what it really is. But we will be discussing Duo. Now, from a Duo's perspective, if you're going to see, Cisco does not want you to be able to configure Duo. They only want you to be able to understand the uses and importance, why a multi-factor authentication is needed, and how it can help networks. Okay. Similarly, why is patching an endpoint important? Right, so they don't want you to understand how would you patch. Okay, how would you do something like Avasus or maybe an SCCM in a Windows environment, okay, to do patching solutions. They don't want you to do that, but they still want you to understand, okay, what that really is. Now, the last section here is, again, your network access visibility enforcement. This is a bit more deep ice. Okay, we are doing things like 802.1x, MAB, web authentication. Okay, Cisco wants you to be able to configure and verify these. Okay, and they want you to understand things like what are guest services, what is profiling, what is posture assessment, what is bring your own device, how do you implement this through ICE. I mean, not implement, but you should be able to describe what BYOD is. Okay, then you should know what CO is. This is part of your radius protocol. Okay, some of the other exfiltration technologies or techniques that attackers can use in your network, something like DNS tunneling, okay, or HTTPS. Right, so with HTTPS, for example, we have nowadays HTTPS 3. Okay, or it's basically being called as QYC. Okay, so this is HTTPS, but over UDP. Google's proprietary experimental protocol. So at your home, try to spin up Chrome, try to send in traffic, try to run Wireshark, you're going to see QIC traffic there. Okay, not good for a network, for an environment, because you cannot decrypt QIC traffic. Okay, so a best practice from vendors nowadays, from something like Cisco, Palo Alto, is to block QIC on your network because it can be used to exfiltrate data. All right. So some of these things that we'll discuss, we'll talk about, things like network telemetry. Okay. When I say network telemetry, it basically means my routers, my switches, my endpoints, providing some sort of an information about what's going on in the network on that particular device. That's what we call as telemetry. Okay. Things like what we capture on, let's say, something like syslog or through NetFlow, something similar. Right. And then at the bottom, Cisco wants you to be able to just know and be able to describe what are these different types of products. Okay, some of these I've already talked about. So for example, this here, SNA. This used to be, or this is the new name for Stealth Watch. Okay, so previously it used to be called as Stealth Watch. Now it's called as Secure Network Analytics. This here is the same thing, but in cloud. Okay, there's something called as Cisco PX Grid. Okay, this is the way that you can integrate a lot of security products together. For example, I can integrate Cisco ISE with Cisco Firewall. I can integrate ISE with something like proxy. Okay, or I can integrate my firewall or ISE with something like a vulnerability scanner as well. All right, so you should know what that is. Then within Umbrella, you have a component which is called as investigate. Okay, again, name is quite intuitive, right? To investigate what's really is going on, what sort of a traffic is going on through your environment. Okay, again, some of these other things, they just want you to know and understand. Okay, not be able to configure. Okay, and that's kind of like a good thing because you won't really be able to get hands-on with a lot of these products. Okay, because some of these are in cloud and some of them are within other solutions or products. Okay, so unless you are working in an environment where you are implementing these things, it's going to be very difficult for you to get hands-on. Okay, so that's a good thing that you only need to describe and not implement or configure some of these things. All right, so this is going to be your S score. Okay, now my purpose is going to be to cover almost everything that's in here. Okay, and I'll basically recommend textbooks and documents as well from time to time. And if anyone has a requirement for a very specific topic, right, that they want to have some information about, then that is something that I will provide from time to time for you to reference. Okay. But this is going to be what your S score is. Okay. So I typically run, or it typically takes a good 70, 80 hours to go through the content for S score because you can see how much of content there is. All right. Any questions?
So Arun, one thing like we are learning the CCNP code, CCNP security. There are so many content, but being a fresher, learning CCNP security and having no knowledge in security and going to looking for a job, is it really like people means company looking for? Because mostly in security, people looking the candidate who having a much experience in security.
So it really depends. I mean, from security perspective, yes, you can get into security perspective. When you say fresher, obviously you won't be hired as an architect or someone in an implementation role. Okay, but you can still get into operations. Okay, if you are starting as a fresher, let's say within security or even in networking in general, and you're starting with the security, any sort of a support role is not bad. Okay, because you kind of learn a lot through a support role. Okay, depending upon where you are, you might also be responsible for supporting a multi-vendor environment. Okay, so you might get experience on not just Cisco, but maybe Palo Alto, maybe Fortinet, maybe Checkpoint. Okay, so you might get to understand what their offerings are with respect to security. Okay, so for example, what Fortinet has to offer with respect to proxy or for email security or for multi-factor authentication, okay, and for firewalls, etc. Okay, so yes, I mean, not everyone is kind of looking for experienced people. People are they're hiring for, again, operations roles as well. Okay, if you're new in the security thing, and it's not a bad thing starting at the support role, because that's kind of that really opens up doors for you later down the line when you want to move into, let's say more consulting roles, or let's say more architect based roles. Okay. Any other questions?
So what will be the like code duration and how the class gonna be?
Duration, I mean, like I said, I mean, I typically care to run this for around, let's say, 60 plus hours. So it should be somewhere around 70, 80 hours. Okay. And we do plan to run this over the weekend. All right. So 2 days, Saturdays and Sundays. Okay. And I typically run the classes for, let's say, about 3 hours. Okay. Couple of minutes up or down. I mean, that's okay. But my classes typically are like 3 hours. Okay. So let's just say 6 hours every weekend. All right. So you would have the rest of the week for kind of going through the content which we have covered. Okay. If you're trying to do some labs, just try to run through those over the week. And the next weekend, just come over, discuss if you have any questions, if there are some topics that you would want me to, redo and cover once again, maybe answer some questions with respect to the labs and everything, right? So that's how I kind of try to do the classes.
Okay.
All right, so you can probably do the calculation. How much time would that take? Okay, so I would probably say maybe about 3-4 months, okay, to get through. But again, you do not want to cram all of this, okay? So that's why it's a good thing to have such big content, such big courses over the weekend, so that you still have time over the week to, to study, to cover some of the things, to understand some of the things, to review the videos and everything. Because obviously, I mean, you are not going to understand everything the first time that I talk about them. Okay, if you are, again, new to the whole security side of things. Okay, so you would have to rewatch videos. Some of the topics you might have to rewatch a couple of times. Maybe look at uh, some other videos, maybe some other content, some Cisco documents and everything. Okay. So think of this as the same way as you would have first time learned CCNA, when you would have been a fresher with respect to the whole networking thing or routing and switching. Okay, so there are lots of things within the CCNA that you do initially. Things like subnetting, right? A lot of people take a lot of time with subnetting, right? Then just understanding things like your CSMA, CA, and CSMA CD. Okay, what's a broadcast domain? What is a collision domain, etc. Okay, so it's the same way, right? But all of that knowledge that you still have from CCNA, you can directly apply here, okay? Because again, let's say if I talk about, for example, a firewall, right? A firewall is nothing but at a foundation, it's basically a layer 3 router. It's a layer 3 device, okay? So it acts the same way as a router does. In addition to it doing additional features with respect to security, which a router just has something like ACLs to do. Okay, so it implements advanced ACLs, okay, which helps it to do some additional things. Okay, but at the base level, right, it is still doing the same thing which your which your router does. It has routing tables. It does routing table lookup. Okay, that's how it decides. It does ARP before it builds the packet. It needs to do NATing as well. Okay, so it needs to do NAT. It needs to do unnat. So everything as it is. So whatever knowledge that you still have from your CCNA time, you can take that and you can one-to-one directly apply here. Okay. Any other questions?
No, not from us.
All right. Okay. So if no one has any questions, so let's just start a topic just for you to just get started um, for a couple of things. So obviously we'll first just talk about and go over the basics, okay, of what security is, or what in general what cybersecurity is, for example. And one other thing about my classes is I don't do slides. Okay, so I don't have PowerPoint presentations. Okay, they're boring. Okay, first thing, and then you guys will tend to sleep pretty quickly if I go through PowerPoints. Okay, so like kind of going through just writing everything on the board. Okay, so that's how the classes are going to be. All right. Now, let's just talk about cybersecurity in general. Okay. In today's time, whatever we do as an individual, we have devices, okay, connecting to the internet, right? You have TVs, laptops, phones, IoT devices, right? Everything is nowadays connected or interconnected. Okay, so you could say we are living in a highly interconnected world, right? So whatever we do on our devices, right, it can either be good or it can either be bad. Okay, so this is the context that you need to understand with respect to what cybersecurity is and what cybersecurity does. Okay, so at its core, cybersecurity is basically a mechanism or a framework to safeguard. Okay, to safeguard you, your personal data, any critical infrastructure, any critical devices. Okay, if we move on outwards, okay, so not an individual, but let's say from an organization's perspective, okay, so protecting the organization's data, their infrastructure, okay, um, talking about from the perspective of, let's say, a country, okay, protecting their economy, okay, protecting the national security, let's say, for a country against any risks that might be caused by any intentional, unintentional misuse, compromise, etc. Right? So if you are aware, recently there was an incident that happened because of CrowdStrike. Okay, I mean, I kind of call it a cybersecurity incident, obviously, because um, something within a cybersecurity product, right? For whatever reason, it went bad. Okay, not going into too much details what it was. All right, and it caused whatever I've talked about. Okay, economy loss for a lot of organizations, for a lot of countries. It caused effect to the critical infrastructure. So airports were down, flights were down. Okay, hospitals affected, um, organizations affected, devices affected, etc. Right? So that's what we try to achieve with cybersecurity, okay? To safeguard everything that we are interconnected nowadays. Okay. Now, cybersecurity typically extends way beyond than just whatever happened with the CrowdStrike thing. Okay, so cybersecurity is very crucial, especially nowadays after um, COVID. Okay, so during COVID, everything was work from home. Organizations were not prepared for it. Everyone was VPN. Everyone was trying to, log in back into the corporate data center, etc. So that kind of increased what we call as an attack surface. Okay, now you could be browsing something at home. You might have downloaded something on a device. Now you connect back over VPN to your corporate network, okay, to your data center. There is a risk that whatever malicious it might be that would be on your device, that might travel through the VPN to your corporate data center, okay, and cause issues there. Okay, so every individual within an organization has a role to play in mitigating a lot of these threats, right from the entry-level employees all the way up to, let's say, your C-suite executives, right, your board of directors. Okay, if you guys are working, okay, in a corporate environment, I'm pretty sure you would be going through a lot of cybersecurity trainings, right, where they talk about things like phishing, how not to click on unknown emails or links. Okay, so every year you might be running through these training modules, right? So that is to get you more information about these sort of security risks, right? What are email campaigns? What are phishing attempts? Okay, and we'll discuss these in a bit more detail later on as well. What are these topics? So developing and maintaining a robust cybersecurity program, let's just call it, for an organization is very crucial in today's kind of interconnected environment. Okay, and by doing so, by implementing a good cybersecurity program, a cybersecurity solution, and those trainings that I talked about that you guys might be going through in your corporate environment, they are part of cybersecurity program as well. Okay, so cybersecurity is not just implementing firewalls, AAA, proxy, etc., VPNs. Okay, it's much more than that. Okay, it also involves educating your employees, educating the actual users, and making sure that they are aware of the security risks that are out there. Okay, that they understand that they should not be, um, you know, giving out credentials or writing credentials on plain text. Okay, they should not be leaving their devices unattended or unlocked, even when they are in office or maybe at home or maybe in the coffee shop or maybe an airport lounge, for example. Okay, so any of these things that you don't do or you miss doing these increases your attack surface. Okay, it gives malicious users or attackers or hackers additional opportunities to do something bad. Okay, and we obviously know what there have been lots of things in the past years, right? From ransomware attacks, where organizations' devices were encrypted, okay, and people demanded ransom or some sort of a money to basically provide a decryption key to decrypt their devices, etc. Okay, so bad could be anything, just stealing your information, okay, or maybe stealing your credentials and trying to log into maybe a bank account and transferring some money. Okay, nowadays you would see a lot of scams being run for UPI and for WhatsApp and through WhatsApp as well. Okay, people calling in and asking you for maybe, let's say, credit card information, credit card number, CVV number. Okay, they are all part of cybersecurity crimes or cybersecurity scams, for example. Okay. Now, another keyword which you might have heard in addition to cybersecurity is InfoSec, right? This is short for information security. Right? So many times people get confused. So I like to call this as traditional. Okay, traditional information security. So a lot of people try to, do one-to-one and confuse information security with cybersecurity. Okay, so information security used to be the past. Okay, so in the earlier days, and when I say earlier days, let's just say 5-10 years ago, there were infosec programs and policies that were designed to protect three things: CIA, okay, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is our end goal at the end of the day. This is what we are trying to do. We are trying to protect the confidentiality of users and data, integrity of the users and data, as well as making sure that the data is available, whoever needs it. Okay. So, and this could be anything. So for example, let's say WhatsApp, right? So they make sure that their services are available, right? So if something happens and their servers go down, then the availability piece is affected. Okay, so coming back to the infosec part, infosec in the past, there used to be infosec policies, security programs, and policies within organizations that were designed to protect the CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. When it used to be within the organization itself, okay, and when I say organization, when everything used to be on-prem or on-premises, all the servers, all the devices used to be within the premises. Okay, this is no longer relevant, right? Because now organizations are not self-contained. Okay, organizations now have devices on-prem, they have devices in the cloud, they have computers in the cloud, okay, obviously as virtual machines. They have users which are remotely working, okay, especially after COVID, right? Hybrid workforce. So every organization nowadays is a potential target now for attacking, hacking, etc. because of us being now in this interconnected kind of a way. Okay, so now whatever devices that we're trying to protect or the data we're trying to protect, it can be anywhere. It can be remote, it can be in the cloud, it can be on-prem. Okay, so infosec is kind of like, let's just call it an outdated kind of a term. Okay, now we kind of replace it and we call it now cybersecurity, which is, again, like I said, a way to safeguard, a process of protecting information. Okay, and we do three things within cybersecurity. We try to prevent any attacks. If there is any attack that might have happened, we try to detect those attacks. Okay, and again, if something bad has happened, how do we respond? How do we fix it? Okay, so prevent, detect, and respond. This is what should be the basis for nowadays for organizations that are trying to do cybersecurity or they're trying to protect themselves. Okay, so organizations nowadays should be, should be ready to protect and defend their incoming and outgoing connections, as well as protect any organization data, and no matter where that data is stored. Okay, so whether that data is being stored in hard disks, in or on storage arrays, let's say in a data center, which we would typically call as data at rest. Okay, data at rest, or maybe data that is in transit, data that is traveling. Okay, maybe you're sending email attachments to emails. or sorry, attachment with emails. Okay, maybe you're trying to download something from the internet, right? Maybe you are trying to access your organization's Office 365 Outlook in the cloud, okay? And you're trying to download some files or trying to transmit some files, right? Maybe you're trying to use Dropbox or maybe Slack, for example, or maybe any other online storage solution, right? And you try to upload some files from your desktop to the storage, that is data in transit, okay? So previously, data used to be at rest or within the organization. It used to be in transit, right? You're sitting on your LAN, you try to access a server in the data center, and that used to remain within the premises. Okay. Now, again, like I said, it's not like that. Okay. So cybersecurity programs and policies nowadays, they have not replaced InfoSec, they have expanded on them. Okay, so now cybersecurity, in addition to doing CIA, it also does, things like risk management. Okay, so big organizations have specific teams and specific individuals who evaluate how much risk is there for the organization for doing whatever they're trying to do. Okay, maybe there's some data that they're trying to implement on the cloud, they're trying to buy a new cloud service, they're trying to move their data center in the cloud. Okay, what sort of a risk that involves for the organization and how that needs to be managed. Okay, so cyber risk management. Then nowadays, there's also an importance of threat intelligence. Okay, so all of these attacks, for let's suppose that CrowdStrike thing that happened last week. Okay, everyone kind of came to know about that. Okay, Microsoft came to know, a lot of other organizations might have come to know about it, a lot of vendors might have come to know about it. Okay, or maybe something like, let's say a ransomware attack happened somewhere in, let's say, any country, maybe something like US or something. Okay, now there are researchers, threat researchers, security researchers out there who are trying to research how that attack happened and how to protect that. So that intelligence information, that research information can then be shared by, or it can be shared with things like, let's say, Cisco or Palo Alto or Fortinet. So they can create their policies or rules within their firewalls to protect against those attacks if it is seen in an environment. Okay? In an environment, let's say somewhere in Asia or somewhere in Europe. Okay, so there is this tight bundle of information sharing that is very important nowadays as well. Okay, everyone needs to share information with everyone else. Think of it like something like very similar to social media, right? So you kind of do something, um, you add a post, you add a photo, you add a post, you add a tag, whatever, right? And a lot of people around you, they basically come to know what really is happening. Same thing here. Okay, threat intelligence. And if you kind of don't understand what's the difference between a risk and a threat is and a vulnerability is, I'll discuss that later on. Okay, I'll talk about that as well. Now, another thing that is there is incident response. Okay, once an attack has maybe happened or has occurred, how does an organization respond to it? Okay, how do you fix it? How do you make sure, or how do you analyze how much damage an attack has done? And how do you fix it? Do you, you turn off the devices, the servers, you re-image those devices and servers. Okay, you try to patch some of those devices and So incident response, right? This is what your SOC teams do. Okay, Security Operations Center teams do. Another very common thing that we do nowadays is threat hunting. Right? There are individuals that are proactively looking at the network, monitoring the network, and try to proactively see if there is some attack that might be happening or something bad that might be happening in the network, which is not evident. Okay, so they are hunting for threats on the network. Right. So a lot of these things, they comprise or they fall into the cybersecurity category or cybersecurity programs as well. Okay. So again, this is again covering all of these things. They're doing the prevention, the detection, and then the response or the responding part. Okay. Now, before I talk about anything else, let me just talk about some of the keywords, specifically 3 of them, okay, which will help you to understand some of the things which we'll talk about later on as well. One is threats. Okay, what are threats? Now, think of a threat as any danger to an asset. Now, that asset could be a hardware device, a software entity, or it could be you as a user as well. Okay, so if, let's say, for example, a real world example, let's say you do not, let's say you went out for shopping, right? You park your car, but you forgot to lock it up. Okay, so your car is at a risk. There is a threat against it. Since it's unlocked, so someone could obviously steal it. If you lock that car, then there is no risk. Okay, so if you lock it down, there is still some risk, but it's not as much as if you had not locked it down entirely. Okay, so again, a threat is any danger that might be to an asset. Okay, in case of an organization or a network, anything can be an asset. It could be your devices, okay, your mobile devices, workstation, laptops, computers, servers, etc. It could be your users as well. They are an asset as well. Okay, anything that has a value to it, it can be called as an asset. Okay, and if someone is able to compromise or do something bad against an asset, that's basically what we call as a threat. Okay, or we basically call it as a threat has been realized. Threat is realized. Okay. So if we come back here, we say threat intelligence, we say threat hunting, right? Going back to our example of that car stolen thing and everything, right? So obviously everyone must be aware what areas we go into. If that area is vulnerable to car stealing or those sort of crimes, so you kind of remain extra vigilant in those areas. Okay, so someone is sharing that information, right? Maybe your RWAs, maybe other people that you hear from, right? Maybe your local police station and everything, they are sharing the information, right? So that's also categorized as threat intelligence, right? You're trying to receive as much information about threats as possible, okay? Then you try to do things, right? For example, lock up your cars properly, right? Making sure you park your cars in well-lit areas, okay? Um, in areas where you would have some traffic, people around, okay? So all of that is part of threat intelligence as well, right? That information, okay? Now, another thing, very important thing, is vulnerability. Okay, you must have heard the term as vulnerability. Okay, you can think of this as a weakness or a flaw. Okay, coming back to that CrowdStrike example, right? There was a flaw in that update that came out from CrowdStrike, which basically, in turn, gave way to this vulnerability. Okay, because of which the devices, they basically went into that BSOD or that blue screen of death kind of an example, and then kept looping or kept rebooting. Okay, so vulnerabilities, again, they vulnerabilities can be in a design, in an implementation, in a software, in a code. Okay, so a lot of time applications have vulnerabilities, or softwares have vulnerabilities, operating systems have vulnerabilities. Okay, so let's just say software. It could be in hardware as well. Okay. Any sort of misconfigurations can be termed as a vulnerability as well. Okay, so if I configure a weak password for, let's say, my banking website, okay, or for anything for that example, that is a vulnerability. And since I have caused a vulnerability, there is a threat against it, right? Because if it's a weak password, let's say I do something like ABC123, right? It won't take a long time for someone to kind of guess that password. Okay, so again, vulnerabilities can give rise to risk and to threats. Okay, and that's what the organizations try to do. A lot of times you see, okay, this device or maybe operating system or Windows 10 came out with this vulnerability, because of it someone was able to do a ransomware attack against it. Okay, so there was some issue or something that was not correctly coded within the software, okay, which opened up the risk, or which gave way to a threat. Okay, so again, vulnerabilities and weaknesses are very common. Remember that. Okay, if we would be living in a perfect world where every software that is written or every code that is written by a developer is perfect. Okay, so if that would have been the case, there would have been no vulnerabilities. And if there would have been no vulnerabilities, there would have been no threats and no risks. So there wouldn't have had any requirement for cybersecurity in the first place. But that is not true. Okay, so vulnerabilities, again, vulnerabilities and weaknesses are very common. Okay, there isn't and there will never be any perfect software. Okay, now it depends what sort of a vulnerability it is. Now, a vulnerability could be very limited, okay, very simple, very weak, and can be very easily, we call it as mitigated. Okay, which basically means how well can we resolve it without causing any potential implications. And then there are vulnerabilities which are catastrophic, something like, again, what happened with CrowdStrike. Okay, a very simple update, it basically caused a week-long havoc and agony across the world. Okay, so you would categorize that vulnerability as catastrophic. Okay, so again, depending upon what sort of vulnerability it is, right, whether it's low, high, catastrophic, that also will govern how big of a threat it is and how big of a risk it is. Okay, and it's very easy for you to look at vulnerabilities as well for anything for that matter. Okay, so vulnerabilities are identified with the help of CVEs. It stands for common vulnerabilities and exposures. Okay, this is an industry-wide standard, CVE. Okay, it is sponsored and backed by the US CERT organization. Okay, which is basically the cybersecurity and communications department within the US Department of Homeland Security. Okay, and they basically they publish a list of CVEs. Okay, and this list of CVEs, it basically highlights all the vulnerabilities that have been known up until now worldwide. Okay, and if I show you what it looks like, so you can go on to cve.miter.org. Okay, so you can see right at the top, total CVE records, right? So about 200, two and a half lakh vulnerabilities. Okay, they do have a new website here as well, which I think is much better way. All right, to highlight that, but I kind of always come back to this website because this is where you can get all the information. So if you know about a particular vulnerability, right, that maybe you're trying to protect your network against, okay, you can come in here and you could search for that vulnerability if you would want as well. Okay, and let's see if we can pull up a vulnerability. Okay, so I searched for a keyword struts. Okay, so this was a vulnerability which came out back in 2023, and it affected a lot of different things. Okay, so you can see every vulnerability here has this name, which first starts with CVE and then the year when this vulnerability came out. Okay, or when this vulnerability was figured out, let's just say. Okay, and then it's basically gets a number behind it. Okay, now I won't go into details about all of this, what's written here. Okay, it will be too confusing, but these are details of the vulnerabilities. Okay, so for example, if we look at this, okay, so it has lots of different information. It gives you a description here as well. Okay, later on I'll talk about what we call as let's say a CVSS score. Okay, um, it's written here. Okay, this is how you score the vulnerabilities. So looking at this, I can't really tell how bad the vulnerability is. Okay, now like I said, the vulnerability can be low, high, catastrophic, etc. Just by looking at this, it does not give me that information. Okay. In addition to knowing about the vulnerability, I can also look at the CVSS score for that vulnerability, which actually will tell me how severe a vulnerability is. Okay, so you can see it basically mentions CVSS severity rating. Okay, so if I click on this link here. I'm obviously going to open up a new page. And in here, you're going to see there is a scoring system here, right? So you can see that this has been classified as a high vulnerability. It has been given a score of 8.8. Okay, so the scoring typically goes from 0 to 10. 10 means critical, that it should be resolved instantly or as soon as possible. Okay, after that, obviously we have high. Okay, so I think typically 7 to 9 falls into high. Then you have medium, then you have low. A lot of organizations don't care about these two categories because they are mostly informational vulnerabilities. They might not affect, or they might not cause any substantial damage to organizations' devices, users, etc. These two categories are the ones which you really need to worry about. Okay, and as you can see, this vulnerability would be something that I would worry about if a network device, if a server in my network was found to be vulnerable by this. Okay, and there are some. So how does they reach to a score? It's because of these vectors that we have, right? I won't talk about these. Okay, then we kind of go into mostly a lot of the other areas, but we'll see. Later on, I just might talk about these, show you a couple of vulnerabilities just to show you why this one got a high and then maybe some other vulnerability might have got a low score. Okay, but we'll talk about this later on. But the important thing now here is the CVSS, which is a severity score, and then the actual CVE, which kind of helps to keep a track of the vulnerabilities. Okay, so CVE, and then I'll write here CVSS. Let's call it severity score. Okay. Any questions about threats, vulnerabilities? Okay. And the final thing that I'll talk here is exploits. Okay. I'm pretty sure you would have heard about these words, hopefully, a lot of times: threats, vulnerabilities, exploits. Now, all of these are interconnected. Okay. Now, exploit is, it could be any piece of software, or it could be a tool, or it could be a technique, or it could be a process that can take advantage of a vulnerability. Okay. So if I maybe set a weak password for my maybe social media account, right? Anyone can take advantage of that vulnerability that I have done. Okay, so again, it could be any software, tool, process, could be any technique. Okay, so if anyone is able to, let's say, guess the easy password, the weak password that I've set, right? That's an exploit. Okay, so someone has exploited that weak password that I have set, which caused the vulnerability for my account, for my user account, and was able to log in. Okay, so every vulnerability is a threat only if there is an exploit to it. Remember this. Okay, so again, exploits are dangerous, obviously. Okay, and why they are dangerous? Why are these advantages dangerous? Because, like I said, every software has vulnerabilities. Okay, if you open up any any server's code, okay, there will be vulnerabilities, obviously. Now, as long as no one knows about those vulnerabilities, those servers are safe. That's what the hackers and attackers are trying to do. They are trying to figure out vulnerabilities. That's what they try to do. Once they can figure out a vulnerability, once someone figures out that my user account has a weak password, they can do a variety of different things to exploit it. Okay, but if someone is not able to figure out the password for my account because I set a very strong password, okay, maybe I set a 16 character password with uppercase, lowercase characters, with numbers, special characters, etc. It will be very difficult for someone to exploit that vulnerability. Okay, so that's why the exploits are dangerous. Okay, so if there are vulnerabilities, there is a possibility that there could be an exploit for it as well. Okay, if let's say if there are vulnerabilities in that software, but no one knows about those vulnerabilities, okay, then no one can exploit it. Okay, if no one knows about my weakness, then no one can exploit my weakness. Okay, so remember this. The vulnerabilities are only a problem if they are known, if someone is able to figure out that there is a vulnerability, this server has a vulnerability, this device has a vulnerability. Okay, only then it can be exploited. Okay, so that's why a lot of times organizations, they attempt, so for example, let's just say Palo Alto, for example, okay, they release a new firewall software. Internally, they would be running tests against that software before it is released to figure out any vulnerabilities and fix them before they basically come out or they are released for the public. Okay, because once the software is released for the public, legitimate users are going to use it, and attackers and hackers are going to try to access the software and figure out any vulnerabilities which Palo Alto might not have been able to figure out and try to exploit them. Okay, so a lot of organizations, again, they attempt to find and fix vulnerabilities before any piece of software gets released to the network. Sorry, to the users. Could be on the network, to be on the internet anywhere. Now, some organizations, they do not do that. Okay, again, I come back to the example of CrowdStrike. Okay, if they failed to test that software, that piece of update properly before it came out, okay, which basically caused or which had a vulnerability which basically affected a lot of devices. Okay. Another piece of information here is something that we call as a zero-day exploit. Zero-day exploits are basically someone or sometimes no one knows about the vulnerabilities. Okay, so let's say for the same example, Palo Alto does not know, and they release the software. They feel that they have done the testing, there are no vulnerabilities, but an attacker somewhere was able to figure out a vulnerability himself and was able to exploit that vulnerability. That is what we call as a zero-day exploit. Okay, because no one knew about that vulnerability before that person was able to figure out that vulnerability.
That means this is a first time attack introduced in a market.
Correct. That's why it's called a zero-day. Okay, and again, zero-day exploits are even more dangerous because obviously the software has come through a lot of testing and everything, and no one knows about the vulnerability. So obviously, there's no fix for that vulnerability because no one knows it. Okay, so anyone can, or if anyone figures out and develops an exploit for it, or figures out an exploit for it, can hack or access that device, okay, delete some stuff, cause reboots, cause restarts, etc. A very famous example for a 0-day that affected very recently. I mean, when I say recently, not a couple of months, but fairly recently, was the Apache log4shell. Okay, so if you kind of keep yourself up to date with, and one more thing with security is, make sure you keep yourself updated with what is going on and what is happening in the world. Okay, make sure you read blogs, you're subscribed to some newsletters across forums, right? You follow some channels, even on social media, or maybe on LinkedIn, which kind of deal with cybersecurity and all this, so that you keep yourselves updated. Okay, that's very important. Okay, because things that are going on nowadays, they would be irrelevant next year. Okay, so that's how fast progressing is the security landscape. Okay, and then what are different vendors doing? Okay, maybe what is Cisco doing for a lot of different things that are going on, right? Maybe cloud is, nowadays happening a lot, right? Everything is trying to go out to the cloud. What is Cisco doing to protect the cloud? What products they have? What are they trying to do? And in comparison, try to see what Palo Alto is doing. What are their products, right? What Zscaler is doing. So you kind of keep yourself updated with that. Okay. Now coming back to the Apache log4shell. So just to give you a very brief, log4shell is basically a library within Linux. Okay, that is responsible for storing logs internally. Okay, and this library has been used within the code, within the software for many years. Okay, since the existence of Linux, for example. But up until a couple of years ago, no one was able to figure out a vulnerability. Okay, and there was an inherent vulnerability within that library, which someone was able to exploit. And that's why it caused a major issue across the world. Okay, because a lot of servers, a lot of web servers, they are mostly Linux based, they're Apache based, and they use log4 that library. Okay, so be it your Netflix, be it your Amazon, be it your Twitter, be it Microsoft, all of these major organizations, they all were affected by this vulnerability. Okay, and since no one knew about this vulnerability, everyone these devices or these organizations, they were exploited because no one knew about them. Okay, so this was a very promising 0-day exploit which someone was able to figure out. I forgot the hacker group that were able to figure it out, and they were able to cause problems, okay, across these organizations. So every major organization, right, you name the organization and they were affected, because again, everyone uses for web servers, Linux servers, and they all have this this library being used. Okay, so this is what we call as 0-day. Okay, vulnerabilities that are being exploited, which previously no one knew about. Okay, so typically what you see, or what I show you here from these vulnerabilities page, these vulnerabilities, they are made public only when these vulnerabilities have been fixed. Always remember. Okay, what all vulnerabilities you see here, right? All of these records, they already have been fixed. That's why they are public, or they are available for us to view. Okay, an organization is not going to release a vulnerability in their software before it has been fixed, obviously. Okay, because if I release a vulnerability, then everyone can view that vulnerability and what that vulnerability is. And if that vulnerability has not been fixed, then anyone can develop an exploit for it, right? There are very intelligent hackers and hacker groups out there, right, who do a lot of complex stuff as well. Okay, so the vulnerabilities that are released out to the public, these are vulnerabilities that basically have been fixed by the organization. Some of the vulnerabilities, yes, are or come through third party. Okay, and then the organizations work to provide a fix through something like a patch or a hot fix or something. Okay, and it really again depends upon how bad or how critical the vulnerability is, which is based off of the CVSS score. Okay, so a lot of organizations will, let's say, for example, Cisco or Palo Alto, they have their devices, their firewalls, stuff. They also get vulnerabilities, okay, and they try to fix them through software updates and everything. Okay, so if a software is affected maybe with a vulnerability which has a CVSS score which is low or medium, it might not get fixed because it's not critical, right? Versus if something is at a high or at a critical, it might be fixed very quickly. Okay, so the higher the vulnerability, the more risk it is of being exploited, and the higher the threat is, basically. All right. So these are my 3 keywords along with the risk keyword here, which is, which you should have awareness about of what it is. All right. And tomorrow, maybe I'll talk a bit more about risk, assets, and threats and vulnerabilities, from some more example perspective, right? But hope this was clear to you of what these threats, vulnerabilities, and exploits are. The only reason for me to cover this again, it's part of the score topic or the blueprints, and later on when we try to implement some features within, let's say, firewall, right? I would be using these keywords there, right? That this is a threat, we're trying to block this thread, this threat, this is an exploit that we're trying to run, maybe this is a vulnerability that we're trying to see, etc. Okay, so if you kind of have this at the back of your mind of what these really are, it kind of help you to do a one-to-one later on and not cause a confusion. Okay, so they're pretty straightforward: threats, vulnerabilities, exploits, and risks. Okay, so again, just to summarize, just remember, everyone or everything has a vulnerability. Okay, there's nothing perfect in this world. Okay, and a vulnerability is nothing but it's a weakness, okay, or a flaw, which can be taken advantage of. Okay, and whatever it can take an advantage of a flaw, that is basically called as an exploit. Okay, so if there are vulnerabilities, you are at risk of a threat. If there are no vulnerabilities, then there are no threats. If there are no threats, then there are no risks. It's as simple as that. Okay, now even when you do know that there's a problem, a lot of times organizations might be burdened with the fact that so typically there is a window that exists between when a vulnerability is figured out and when a patch is made available by the organization to prevent any exploit that can take advantage of that vulnerability. Okay, so again, and typically in organizations, if there is a very critical server, which is very critical from a business application or business function perspective, it would typically take a very long time for that server to be patched. Okay, so typically from a management perspective, they might be afraid of interrupting that server, okay, or afraid that if a patch is maybe implemented, it might affect the stability or the performance of that web server. All right, so there are lots of things that go on in an organization, right? In a perfect world, obviously, there's a vulnerability, we fix it, we install the patch, and we are good. But in organizations, that is typically not how things work. Okay, there are management change windows, there are approvals that go on. If it's a big organization, there will be tons more approvals just to reboot, restart, or install something on a server. And like I said, if it's a critical server, then it will take even more time. Okay, so the longer a server is not being patched, the greater is your risk, obviously, or the organization's risk. Okay, but then again, it is very important for you to understand, to be able to persuade the management, depending upon, okay, how bad the vulnerability is. Okay, if it gets exploited, how bad could it affect the devices, the organization as a whole as well. Okay, so there will always be, like I said, there will always be vulnerabilities, there will always be risks. Okay, so you cannot have 100% secure environment, 100% non-vulnerability environment and a 100% no risk environment. Okay, your goal from the cybersecurity program's perspective is to bring that number close to zero as possible, as close to zero as possible. Okay, again, you cannot have zero vulnerabilities, and you cannot have zero risk. Your goal with all of these different products, technologies, is to reduce that risk to close to zero, as close to zero as possible. Okay, cannot be eliminated though. Okay, questions?
One thing, sir, not this, but I think you forget to introduce yourself. Like you have given the nice demo. The topics are very much clear.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I did mention my name. So I have um, I have a little over 10 years of experience across networking. So I have been part of a variety of different technologies, variety of different domains, enterprise. I've worked on SD-WAN side of things. Um, I have worked on primarily nowadays, and for the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years, it has been primarily security. Okay, so I have been working with Cisco Security Solutions. I have worked with Palo Alto. I have done some work with Fortinet and very little Checkpoint as well. Okay, um, so let's say from a certification perspective, I do have Palo Alto certifications, right? I have PCNSC. I do have a CCNP Security as well. I might do CCI Security someday if I have the if I have the time and the money for it. But for now, that is gonna be at rest. But yes, so yeah, that's what my background is kind of like. And I mean, I really enjoy the teaching part, trainings and everything. So I've conducted a bunch of trainings, these as well as a lot of corporate trainings, in-house trainings, on-site, offshore, onshore, right? Tons of different places. But yeah, nowadays, primarily my focus remains on security with a focus around the cloud security, things like SASE. So that's where the SD-WAN as well comes in. SASE, SSE, right? So all of these buzzwords that you see out in the world. So I try to, simplify those things, make you guys understand these complex stuff in a little bit better way. And then surely, I mean, we're just trying to help out. I'm still learning, okay? Still lots of things that I don't know, uh, but yeah, I mean, we're all learning. We're just trying to help each other out, get across. Okay. Any other questions for me?
No, no, not from my side.
All right. Okay. So we'll end it here today. Okay. So the initial couple of classes, like I said, they're basically just demo just to get you up to speed, what it is, how my teaching style is, and everything. Okay. So just to have that, so tomorrow we'll have the same 1.5 hour kind of class, and then from next weekend, we will have the full-fledged 3 hour classes every day. So that obviously we also need to cover a lot of topics, a lot of different things as well. Okay. So I'll see you guys again tomorrow.
One more thing, Arun, the time
Yes,
is same or like it would be a different time?
time will remain the same.
11.
So yep, so we'll be starting at 11, and then we'll go up until 2:30 at
Okay.
max. All right. Okay, thank you guys. Thank you for joining in today. All right, and then I'll see you tomorrow again. Have a good